This meeting to order. I hated to interrupt that lovely serenading that was taking place. I don't know if Clifford was enjoying it or falling asleep or just getting into a mood. Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on January 18, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the traceability to fish and seafood products. This meeting, of course, has taken place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. Please inform me immediately if interpretation is lost, and we'll ensure it is restored before resuming. We've got a number of witnesses, but before I go and introduce them, I will say that the clerk has told me that the volume in the room was very high, so it'd be much better if members could keep their mics turned down but use the earpiece to hear, because it may interfere with translation, being able to follow the meeting the way they would like to. So now, as witnesses, as an individual, of course, we have Monsieur Chalabois, Professor, Agri-Food Analysis Lab, Dalhousie University, from, and I could get this all wrong, but I'll go with it anyway, FOPO Grizzly Incorporated. We have Laura Boivin, Chief Executive Officer, and from Safe Quality Seafood Associates, we have Mr. Scott Zimmerman, Chief Executive Officer. There's two Zimmermans in the meeting. That might be a problem. We will now proceed with opening remarks from Mr. Chalabois for 5 minutes or less, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, fellow witnesses, and participants. I want to thank the committee for inviting me to speak about the seafood industry and about traceability. Being from Nova Scotia, where the fish and seafood industry plays a large role in our economy, I feel very privileged to be speaking to you today. Over the years, many reports in Canada have suggested that seafood fraud cases are rampant in Canada. We believe that anywhere between 25% to 60% of fish and seafood served at restaurants in Canada are mislabeled, and up to 10 to 15% of fish and seafood products sold at retail in Canada are also mislabeled. While seafood fraud is a global problem, Canada is known to be lagging in food traceability overall when benchmarked with other countries. For this committee today, I would like to make the following overarching principal recommendations for a stronger traceability program for seafood in the country. Recommendation number 1. The fish and seafood industries are a global enterprise. Any comprehensive approach to traceability would need to accept this as a fact. The current deficit of standard informational obligations in seafood leads to lack of interoperability. This, in turn, diminishes transparency and thus inhibits traceability. This issue impacts business efficiency and enables the conditions that can lead to illicit activity. Many technologies exist, but don't go far enough. We are to believe that sustainable fishing is possible. Programs like the non-for-profit Marine Stewardship Council, which I think you're inviting to this committee, can discipline the entire industry while reassuring the public. Such a model transcends borders. The strict supply chain certification, which uses random DNA tests, helps ensures that MSC certified seafood is always labeled correctly and kept separate from non-certified options. It is a worthy model. The use of such a model should be encouraged. Recommendation number 2, traceability is a tool. It already has demonstrated benefits in other industries such as pharmaceuticals, automotive, high-tech, and aeronautics. At first, regulatory food safety related requirements push more adoption of traceability systems and practices, but the business and financial benefits related to food integrity will drive and sustain its use. Many technologies already exist, but the focus has mainly been one up, one down. In fish and seafood, that's not enough. Today, food integrity and the threat of food fraud is certainly a motivating factor. And based on our research, food integrity has more market currency today than food safety. Rewarding companies which adopt better transversal traceability practices would be a step forward, encouraging the use of technologies like machine vision, the Internet of Things, and blockchain to automate the processes and take human error or deception out of the equation would be key. Recommendation number 3, seafood businesses that are committed to maximizing the value they deliver to consumers are already using relevant, dependable, and readily accessible data about their products to gain a competitive advantage and grow their businesses. While globally, there has been some progress on mitigating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, recent information suggests that awareness of the consequences of illicit activity is not deterring offenders. Perhaps Canadians are uninformed of the problem, so building public awareness about food fraud would be key. On this, I'd like to thank the committee for listening to me. These are my main recommendations. I would welcome any questions the committee has at this time. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Madame Boivin for 5 minutes or less, please.
Good morning. I thank you very much for having received me today. It's an honor for me today to be able to address you. I'm Laura Boivin. I'm the president and CEO of Fumoir Grizzly, and it is a private enterprise in the province of Quebec. We produce several kinds of salmon, some tuna, primarily tartares, salmon burgers that are sold through retailers and also in restaurants and institutions. The 5 that we produce are chum, sockeye, wild chum, coho Atlantic, and trout and tuna. So we yesterday wanted to point out a few issues as a processor of fish that are issues. I don't necessarily have several recommendations, but I want to point out what are issues for me. So first of all, what is confusing for many customers is the origin of fish. On wrappings, we'll see that things are imported that mention where they were processed or where they were caught. It's not clear, and there's a great deal of confusion on that. So I've seen many labels in groceries that don't even have that level of information, so the consumer is not informed. Also, in terms of labeling, there are allegations that can't be verified or are unverifiable. So it's any old thing. So, for example, antibiotic-free salmon, that it says, whether it says they haven't had used antibiotics, at what stage of production can it be claimed to be antibiotic-free? There's no rule in that regard. And that also could result in confusion for the consumer at the end of the line. Also, there are also what we call these fish, Atlantic salmon, for example. There have been some awareness campaigns. And that Atlantic salmon isn't a salmon that comes from the Atlantic Ocean. It's rather a genetic description. It is salmon salar, which could come from Chile or Norway. So also that's confusing for the customers. So if we're talking about genetics, there can also be confusion concerning Pacific salmon, because it might have come from the Pacific Ocean, but from Chile. It might be from chum or king salmon lines. So when we talk about wild Pacific salmon, you're talking about a fish that might be very abundant in the ocean rather than one that's very rare and has a very different price. And another issue I wanted to raise today, I don't know if the committee has discussed this, which is transgenic salmon. We became aware of this kind of salmon a few years ago, and there was an outcry and all kinds of comments from grocery stores that refused to sell it, etc. And this situation with transgenic salmon is a particular one in Canada because people aren't obliged to mention that in the labeling or in a restaurant or wherever it might be consumed. So the final consumer doesn't know if they're eating a transgenic fish or not. So having said that, there's no health problem that's related to transgenic salmon. However, I don't really have a formal position on that situation either, other than to say that it's not mentioned and that we should discuss this issue if we're going to give any importance to the traceability of fish. So generally speaking, I would wrap up my comments in saying that as a processor and provider of fish, we already have many standards that are imposed on us for traceability. We have the CTQF, we have the ASC certification as well, the MSC and the BAP, so there are a lot of traceability rules there, and that requires integrated systems in processing plants. So my only comment this morning really is that we shouldn't add to the burden of processors. And if we're adding traceability rules with the certification systems that are already in space, it might add costs and wouldn't really make it necessary for us to have those certifications. So last week with the ASC certification, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, the only thing we had to change in our processes was where the logo appeared. So that will cost 0.5% more in terms of our sales to remain in line with that certification council. But traceability is important. So we really need, I think, take into consideration that there are already certification bodies, and we try to follow that as processors. So we want to avoid extra costs and particularly ensure that the same rules be applied to everyone, including for products that are imported onto our territory. And I'm available to answer your questions if you have any for me. So thank you for listening to me.
We'll now go to Mr. Scott Zimmerman for 5 minutes or less, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you. I find it an honor to speak with Canadian government, so I appreciate your time. My name is Scott Zimmerman. I own a company here called Safe Quality Seafood Associates. We're a consultancy, basically an external quality assurance, quality control person. I work for the industry, I work for FDA, and I address compliance issues specific to seafood industry. Today, I'm going to speak briefly with you folks about FDA regulations, NOAA regulations, and third-party requirements for traceability in the United States. The first topic I want to touch on is a new proposed rule by the FDA, which covers requirements for additional traceability outside of the one up, one down, which is required through the Bioterrorism Act. This new regulation is under the U.S. New Food Safety Modernization Act, which came about in 2011 and is still being implemented. But the goal of the new traceability requirements is to reduce the amount of time needed during an outbreak, especially, to identify contaminated product. And that is going to address one of 4 different core elements in FDA's new smarter era for food safety. Going beyond one step forward and one step backward, any food that's been listed on the food traceability list, for in the case of seafood, that's just about every type of seafood, is going to require that key data elements like temperature and traceability codes are collected during critical tracking events. And that's especially like when product is moving from one hand to another in the chain of custody. This is increasingly needed, especially for ready-to-eat foods that don't have a kill step before the consumer opens the package and eats it. The critical tracking events that FDA is going to focus on would include the growing, which would include aquaculture operations, or receiving, which would include, taking raw material off a fishing vessel. The production of the food would require traceability at those as a critical tracking event. Different types of key data elements like temperature, for example, would be required to be collected at that step. Any step where product or raw material is transformed would require traceability data, including shipping. So FDA is going to expect all of that traceability to be collected in a sortable spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet, in order to be considered compliant. The next traceability program I wanted to talk about is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Seafood Import Monitoring Program. This is a program that's relatively new, and it's required under the Magnuson-Stevens Act here in the US to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries or misrepresented seafood from entering the United States and entering commerce. So NOAA officers are required to conduct these audits of importers here in the US and make sure that there's critical information collected at each point of movement or what we call the chain of custody. So currently, this seafood import monitoring program is restricted to 13 imported fish and fish species groups, which, if you look at it from a greater perspective, that's 1,100 unique species of fish are being traced by NOAA at this time. But there are lobbying efforts taking place here in the United States to include additional species to the Seafood Import Monitoring Program, or what we call the SIMP program. SIMP also, and NOAA, has recognized that there are groups of importers in the United States that have maintained compliant programs. So they've created a compliant importers list as a function of that. That's going to recognize those importers here in the US that have demonstrated a history of compliance. The last traceability kind of component that I'd like to talk about is not regulatory, it's voluntary, and that's through third-party certification. So there's several different standard owners, such as the MSC and the ASC, so Aquaculture Stewardship Council, the BAP, which is Best Aquaculture Practices, BRC, which is British Retail Consortium, SQF, Safe Quality Foods, just to name a couple.
Mr. Zimmer, I'm going to have to leave it at that. We're gone over the 5-minute mark quite a bit, and hopefully anything else will come out in the rounds of questioning. And all members have a copy of your opening remarks as well. So we'll now go to questions, and we'll start off with Mr. Perkins for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize in advance to the witnesses for this slight diversion. I'd like to move a motion that the committee urge the government to remove Russia from the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization, cutting off another important source of revenue for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and that this motion be reported to the House.
Okay, before I can ask for any discussion or take part in anything to do with that motion, we're not actually in committee business. We're in a study, and we have witnesses here. It has to be agreed to by unanimous consent to be able to introduce either motion at this time.
Mr. Chair, on a point of order, maybe if he would delay it to the last half hour of the meeting, we could have a discussion so that we're not taking away from the witnesses.
That's fair.
Okay.
Okay. All right, you're up for your questioning.
Thank you, witnesses. This has been a fascinating study. I think we all agree it's been pretty enlightening into the situation. And as the committee members know, I've been focusing a bit on the consumer side of it at the point of sale. And I particularly like to welcome fellow Nova Scotian, Professor Charlebois, to the things. And my first question is for him, if I could. We've had a lot of testimony around the issue of the testing of the amount of accuracy of the labeling at retail. You mentioned 10 to 15% in retail, I think, and up to 40% in restaurants. We've had similar testimony from Oceana and other witnesses. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, let's focus maybe on the retail side of it. CFIA has very minimal requirements of 3 basic things that they require on the packaging. What additional items do you think should be mandatory that should be on packaging for consumers?
You're on mute.
Well, thank you for your question. I think Ms. Boivin alluded to this issue of provenance. I think it's important for, especially right now, a lot of people are looking for local foods. They would be reassured if the information, the data on packaging, on labels is actually accurate, giving the information to consumers where the product is actually from. Also, this whole issue of species is quite confusing. Again, I really enjoyed Ms. Boivin's testimony because I think it's telling to how confused consumers are. There are so many species out there, it gets confusing. It also gets confusing for retailers as well, by the way. Again, going back to Ms. Boivin's testimony, she did talk about the genetically modified salmon. And we saw many retailers boycotting, including Sobeys, Loblaws, boycotting the Aqua Bounty salmon. But it doesn't mean that they're not selling it. They may actually be selling the product as an ingredient embedded in other products they're selling at retail. This is why I think it's important to really, to your point, to start with the consumer and figure out exactly what kind of information the consumers need at the point of sale, and then work your way back to the source to make sure that the data actually flows through the entire process.
Thank you. It's been suggested by some of the other witnesses that things included should be things like the scientific name, the gear with which it was caught, the location perhaps where it was caught, and other information around processing should be mandatory. What are your views on that?
It is a good point. Metro in Germany, which is equivalent to our Costco in Canada, would actually offer a QR code. You can use your phone at the point of sale, and you can scan your QR code, and you would know exactly who caught the fish, when it was processed, what ingredients was actually added to the product before it got sold at retail. And all that information is given to the consumer, whether they want it or not. It's actually available.
Thank you. And maybe I can pose this to both Professor Charlebois and Mr. Zimmerman. We've had a lot of discussion about the European standards and how they've evolved, and the United States standards. They appear to be a little different. If we were to make recommendations to improve where we're going with our labeling at retail and traceability, could it be done in a way of assessing or taking the U.S. or more importantly, the EU standards, and while at the same time sort of reducing the burden, because we have yet a third standard being the Canadian standards. So which one would you recommend in particular? Because we have heard that the European Union standards are sort of state of the art. Maybe Professor Charlebois first, or Mr. Oh, there's Mr. Zimmerman.
Yeah, I mean, my wheelhouse is U.S. requirements. I'm not going to say that I know much about Canadian or EU standards. And so I do know that there's a wealth of resources for consumers and regulators to turn to at FDA to get that information. There's videos, there's labeling guides. So, we've been at it for a long time in the seafood industry. We like to think that the guidance that's published by FDA, and I don't speak on behalf of FDA, but I do enjoy their materials, and I find them consumer friendly. I teach those materials on a monthly basis for the Association of Food and Drug Officials, and I find them very easy to digest. So I think that there's a lot to be gained by going through the FDA's website along with their guidance documents. I think it's quite clear what is expected of the industry here in the U.S.
If I may,
sorry, Mr. Charlebois, the time has expired. Hopefully somebody will get back and some of the similar thoughts and you'll be able to respond, or you can submit a response in writing to the committee. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Charlebois, I'll start with you. It's fun to see you in person. I read religiously your opinions on these issues in here in New Brunswick. You've made my job a bit easier. I wanted to ask what your recommendations were for the committee, and you presented them to the committee, but I'd like to get more into the rules, the new certifications. The right whales in the Gulf issue has had not a catastrophic effect, but we've had to adapt. So the MSC rules have been in place for several years, and the industry seems to be saying what we were saying in the beginning, that it was important to maintain those rules, the MSC, and the industry seems to be saying that there are challenges here, or that it won't even have an effect. So would you agree with that? Well, in fact, my opinion, Mr. Cormier, I think that the real problem is not necessarily those who are looking for MSC certification. It's the ones who don't do that. And so that's why often I find it's unfortunate for businesses like Madame Boivins, for example, who are following the rules and according to good practices, best practices, but on the margins of all of this, some businesses don't follow the rules. And so, unfortunately, we're talking about oversight policies, and we need to get rid of the businesses that really are seriously harming reputations. And I was reading a lot about this morning. Yeah, so we're talking about seafood fraud, and this is a significant issue. And the businesses that follow the rules aren't the problem. I look at a lot of businesses, and the ones that follow the rules are not in a good position to say anything. So you mean to continue with the MSC certification is important for the industry, don't you think? Well, yeah, in my opinion, it's the model to follow. It is a really good one, and it's international as well. When you talk about food fraud, you're talking about fraud in terms of whether it's seafood products or others that are found in packages, or you're talking about monetary fraud for prices that aren't declared. Well, for me, food fraud, the result of a fraud is a label that has inadequate information on it. So there are three kinds. There's contraband, there's mixing of ingredients, and misrepresentation. So for fish and seafood, it's primarily misrepresentation that we see so often. So labels that don't mention the right species or origin, etc. So do you think that the rules we have in Canada are robust enough in terms of imports or even exports? Is there room for improvement, as you said in your recommendations? Well, I believe that in Canada there are enough rules. It's an enforcement issue, making businesses comply with them. Okay, thank you.
quick question. So you're based in USA, right? What you said. So as you know, Canada export a lot of like lobster and crab, for example, to US. So you talked about the certification also, like BRC, MSC certification. Only in my writing, I have like 12 fish plan here that are all moving to some of those certification. Do you think that US market is also looking after those certification, that it will be like, mandatory to have those certification in the future to export in the US?
But for some of the larger companies, they're going to push.
Mm-hmm.
This is their insurance, is
Mhm.
that third-party certification. But I can't stress enough the importance of understanding that those certifications are a snapshot of what's happening at the facility,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are only as good as the competency of that auditor
Mm-hmm.
during that audit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yes, U.S. has started to weigh heavily on third-party audits as well, as a function of meeting the Food Safety Modernization Act requirements.
Mm-hmm.
These audits are going to have to be conducted. And
Mm-hmm.
so without getting a new set of eyes into the facility and doing the walkthroughs and doing the traceability exercises and challenging the quality management systems, you only have what the government can, enough. Do you guys have enough boots on the ground
Mm-hmm.
to do your own audits from a government, and then, it's one thing for a big retailer to say in their policy that they require third-party certification, but who's auditing that they're actually meeting those requirements, and who's taking a closer look at the actual audit results as well?
Okay, thank you. Madame, je pense qu'il me reste plus grand temps.
I don't think I have much time left, but Ms. Boivin, the rules that you have in place and that you must follow, is it something that's really difficult as a business to comply with all of these rules, or is it easy enough? Well, it's something that requires a certain level of expertise. We have 3 people that work full-time on quality here, but we consider that it's absolutely essential to in order to have these certifications. For example, the ASC certification that we have asked for, and some of our suppliers and clients want this too. I would say that there is a pretty intense price involved in having this, and it adds to the cost for the final consumer, obviously, because the fact of choosing a supplier who's responsible results in a certain limitation. And maintenance of these certifications costs something too. ASC, for example, I mentioned, we have to have a percentage of the sales that's related to that. So in my opinion, the certifications that we currently have, even though they're difficult to maintain, are absolutely necessary. Having said that, I would allow myself to say that I agree entirely with what Mr. Charlebois has said. The problem is in terms of enforcement of the rules and not in terms of what currently exists. Businesses like us are doing our best. We maintain them.
And now to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say hello and salute Ms. Boivin. This is a 30-year-old business that has a 30-year reputation of being a responsible business. And I thank you for being there, and I thank the other witnesses as well. It's very interesting. Ms. Boivin, in all of the accreditations, the certifications, ASC, MSC, etc., can you tell us if they all have a role to play, or could we bundle them together under the heading of certain kinds of well, in my opinion, they have different niches, but traceability is addressed, food security and safety is addressed. So MSC covers wild salmon, ASC covers farm salmon, aquaculture, but in the end, we want to have sustainable fisheries and traceability, and so the answer really is that some could, in fact, be twinned or bundled together, yes, indeed, because each one, for example, some American chains will ask for the Monterey aquaculture accreditation that we can only find in Norway. Others will ask for the ASC. Others will ask for BAP. So depending on the retailers, we have to comply with those certifications. But each time we're asking another layer, we're putting on another layer of cost. Right. So tell me, what for you would simplify your work while not increasing your costs? What could improve things, in your opinion? Well, in my opinion, a responsible business should ensure that they're supplying the final customer with a good product. So I think there's certification organizations that are there already could be bundled together, but they want to ensure that there is a good product that's a responsible product, a sustainable one. But perhaps we shouldn't be asking businesses for really specific certifications just because they think it's necessary. So any awareness campaign will help the system that currently exists, but the problem is to make people comply with the rules and regulations that exist, particularly for what's imported to our country, because it's like we're more strict with businesses that are local rather than for people who are importing from outside the country. So there's food that doesn't necessarily come from Canadian companies. So I think there needs to be more inspectors or people on the front lines who will ensure that what we have in hand and what we are representing to the final customer is what it is. So adding rules, well, as processors, we already have a great many. So every new rule adds a cost to the final consumer because there's a limit as to what we can support when our net profit margin is only 5%. I agree with you entirely. Mr. Charlebois, in past meetings, the idea was raised that it's of interest to have a table where all of the players, big and small, owners, processors, big businesses, government authorities, everyone could sit around the same table to set up a more cohesive system. So I was wondering if we couldn't even have a sort of auditor general for traceability. So, Monsieur Charlebois or Ms. Boivin, either of you, could you like to speak to that? Does that speak to you? Yes, thank you very much for the question, Ms. Desbiens. I've always was a fan of an approach by sector that we really started in Quebec several years ago when I was in the province. This approach allows indeed for all of the players to get together and share what problems exist in the industry. And traceability, in my opinion, affects everyone. So what happened with traceability, in my opinion, and I spoke a bit about this in the beginning, is that we associated that with food safety. And over the years, we sold food safety as an added value. It's not an added value. It's a way of doing business. It's a guarantee that we offer, and not just to the consumer, but to all players. So the fraud aspect and the integrity of the chain has become of critical importance. And that's why, in the beginning, in my first comments at the beginning of this meeting, I really wanted to send you the message that we have to compensate those who are doing good work, indeed to protect the integrity of the chain, the food chain. And I think we don't do that enough in Canada. It's very interesting. Do I have any more time, Mr. Chairman? No? Oh, it's over. Okay.
You wouldn't get your question in, certainly not an answer. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sounds like it. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Lots of good information coming our way. I was hoping that Madame Boivin could expand a little bit on the points being made around the costs to the consumer of this traceability process that's being undertaken. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on the consumer response to these increased prices, the impacts on the business, and any changes that you think would be helpful to help your business to accommodate or to better serve the consumer through this process.
I don't have a general answer to that. What I can say is that, for example, the certification that we have just taken on here would have a total cost of $100,000 per year on our business, plus $20,000 for the maintenance of that certification annually. So that's one certification that I'm talking about. And here at Grizzly, we have several. So for one particular client, the end cost was 0.8 cents the last time we calculated that for him. So I suppose it can have a significant enough impact, this traceability. So what is the final cost to the consumer? A lot claim that it's very important, whereas, for example, we have an Aliment Québec certification here, but the lift isn't that important for the final consumer. So is that final consumer ready to accept the cost versus the added value for that person, given the fact that currently the cost of food is increasing? So I don't have that answer, but it seems to me that often the answer that the consumer gives is not something that really you can reconcile with what we're seeing. From the business side, and Mr. Charlebois, I've heard you talk about this a lot, but there is a cost, it's clear, but any responsible business should have a traceability system and would be ready to take on that cost. But are all of these certifications necessary if we want to sell to big retailers? Well, we don't have a choice. But there's a limit to what we can take on as retailers, and yet there has to be some basis to all this, and obviously the consumer ends up paying for all of this. So I'm very sorry not to have a more specific answer for you in terms of final costs.
You're on mute, Ms. Barron.
Unmuting is helpful. Thank you, Madame Boivin, and that information that you provided is helpful. I was just hoping to gain a better understanding and to expand on some of the points that you were making. So that's helpful, but anything further that you'd like to add, feel free to please send our way as well. My next question is for Dr. Charlebois, and specifically around, I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you think could help make Canadians more aware of the products that the seafood products and the labeling. So sort of some educational components that you feel might be helpful for consumers to better understand seafood that they're purchasing and consuming.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Barron. It's a great question. So first of all, just to respond to add to Madame Boivin's answer on price, demand elasticity in fish and seafood is actually quite high. So the market is not as price sensitive for those products than for other products in the grocery store. So just wanted to throw it out there. It's important. So competitiveness is important, but price sensitivity is not as high. So, but to your point about education and awareness, about 10 years ago, I started to talk about food fraud during my talks, and I had to explain what food fraud was. Not today. I think a lot of people are aware that there is a problem. They just don't understand what that problem actually looks like. And so I think it would be very important, whether it's the CFIA or another agency. I think the CFIA should have that role of educating the public. How does food fraud occur? And there are several different scenarios Food fraud can happen in many different ways, but I would suggest to focus on three types: adulteration, counterfeiting, and misrepresentation. Those are the three categories that I think the public should know more about.
Thank you. And I hope that we'll give you enough time at this point, but I was hoping that you could expand a little bit or finish what you wanted to say around Mr. Perkins' question, specifically around Canada trying to match the US or EU standards. I just wanted to give an opportunity to hear a little bit further from you around that.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. So in my opening remarks in that document, I actually cited a benchmark report that we actually conducted a few years ago on traceability specifically. We compared Canada with other nations around the world, including Europe and the United States. Now, Canada is a lagging country, but in my view, by far, the EU is farther advanced in terms of traceability standards, in my view, just because Europe is complicated and they've been able to figure out I would say, harmonized standards amongst several nations. And like I said, inherent in food fraud or fish traceability is the nature that it is a global market. I'm not sure if the committee knows, but 90% of what we consume in Canada is imported, and we export 90% of what we produce. Same in the US approximately. So it's a global problem. And the EU has really made some major progress in terms of understanding those risks related to how global the industry is.
Thank you. Chair, do I have time for another question?
No, we're going over.
Thank you.
We'll go to our next round now, a 5-minute questioning, and we'll go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Today I'll start off with a couple questions for Mr. Zimmerman. Mr. Zimmerman, you mentioned the NOAA system and tracking regarding illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries, and I think you said it was restricted to 13 species. Is the current tracking system sufficient to address IUU fishing and illegal sales, or what are the gaps that need to be bridged to reduce that?
I think that the industry has been being challenged for a long time here in the United States, some of the larger components, but it's those medium and smaller importers that have been falling underneath the radar, and they continue to grow and, demand more, create more of a footprint in our fisheries here in the U.S. And I think that there's a challenge in auditing these systems and understanding what the chains of custody are and what's natural to a fishery in another country, how many hands it does move through, and then finally whether the raw material was sourced from an IUU source. I think there's also challenges in understanding the laws and regulations in those other countries and how NOAA auditors are able to digest those laws and whether they're meeting their requirements in the country of origin is also very concerning, because product can be. Yep.
Thank you. There was also some discussion earlier today about the certification systems and how they vary from one jurisdiction or system to another. Do you think there's a requirement for a standardization or a consolidation of certification systems? And who would be the best body to oversee that?
I think that there are some structures that are coming into place, whether it's the Global Food Safety Initiative or the Global Seafood Sustainability Initiative. Those are benchmarking tools. I think it's important for them to work with the certification bodies that they're accrediting to do those audits and enabling those certification bodies to to basically do a harmonization or do a study across the audit so that they're not auditing the same thing twice, that they could send one auditor and do the recall exercise, do the traceability exercise, do the quality management system exercises, because a lot of those components are very similar to one another across standards. And so by these certification bodies training their auditors to do these integrated audits, it's going to save a lot of those processors a lot of money. So,
Okay.
but it's up to it's up to them to.
Thank you. I'll switch to a question to Mr. Charlebois now. You mentioned that rules, current rules and laws seem to be sufficient, but enforcement is lacking. Now, is that enforcement within Canada, enforcement in other countries, enforcement of what's being imported into Canada? Can you elaborate a little further on that?
Well, thank you, Mr. Arnold. I would say that the major problem, I would focus on imports, to be honest. There's a lack of surveillance, and compliance becomes an issue domestically, I would say. We do have a lot of regulations in Canada already to support our companies right here in our own backyard. And frankly, for the most part, they really do a good job. I've actually visited aquaculture facilities in Nova Scotia, and they are very much aware of rules. Now, with imports, I actually don't think that we're monitoring enough of what comes into our own country. And to Mr. Zimmerman's point, I actually think that there's something that needs to be done there. Going back to the MSC example, again, it's a global enterprise, a global surveillance system. DNA testing is really one way to make sure that the species you have in front of you is consistent with what's on the label. And a lot of grocers are actually focusing more on that technology.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This is fantastic information we're getting. Just a heads up, I will be moving a motion a little bit later in our business section to add a day to this study. There's some people we need to talk to. Okay. I want to focus, as Mr. Perkins has done, on the end consumer. The end consumer will not understand the Latin name for a species. They may not care very much about the type of gear used or anything else. There are people who do care for good reasons, but if we look at the end consumer, we need to think about ways of, and perhaps through recommendations, of helping the consumer in a glance know what they're buying. I guess the question that I would have, and we'll start with you, Professor Charlebois. Is it professor or doctor? Or either one?
Either one.
Either one, okay. And perhaps Madame Boivin as well. If you look at the trail of the fish from the time it's caught to the time it ends up on somebody's plate, who has the pen when it comes to the labeling? Who has the opportunity to label that fish or to change the labeling on that fish? So we have processors, we have wholesalers, we have retailers and restaurants. Are there other people or other entities in that chain that have an opportunity to influence the label? Professor Charlebois?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I think your opening comment was quite important here. When we talk about food fraud, I often say to people, if you walk into a sushi place and it's an all-you-can-eat bar, well, before COVID, all-you-can-eat bar of sushi for $15 a person, you have to ask yourself some questions. And this is really the problem. I mean, it's the will to ask the right questions. And I think the power belongs to the consumer in the end. The last thing that our 5 majors want is a food fraud scandal, and I would include Loblaws, Sobeys,
Oh,
Metros.
I do understand that, but I need to get kind of a precise answer to the question. Who actually? And by the way, we had a sushi place in Metrotown in Burnaby that was right next to a pet store. I didn't want to throw that in, but let's who actually has control of the label along the supply chain? Madame Boivin, do you have any thoughts on that?
In fact, the labeling can change at any point in the supply chain. It could be on the board, the blackboard of the restaurant that says, let's say, the trout from whatever provenance, right down to the fish counter in the grocery store that can put up a little sign. I mean, it's throughout the entire food chain. But the verification organizations in Quebec, there's MAPAC, which has certain accreditations, and there are ones that are federally accredited. So MAPAC is the Quebec Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. So they might ensure that there are the products are correctly represented. But there might be a smokehouse in the grocery store. I mean, it's so different from one place to the next. So could federal standards apply in restaurants and what they put on the blackboard? And who's going to make sure that people are complying with those rules, even if the will is there? So I doubt that we can force that kind of compliance because we can't currently have people respect the current rules and regulations on labeling. And here in Canada, and this is very visible in supermarkets. So I understand that we want to have a really broad perspective on it, but I don't think that can be done with the current resources that we have.
And I have to throw this open because I don't know who could answer the question. Is there somebody in the supply chain who's really the pivot point for the veracity of the labeling of the fish? Or somebody who could be, if you like, deputized to really be, responsible for the accuracy of the label? I would look at, for instance, the wholesaler who would buy perhaps from the processor and then distribute to everybody else. But I don't know. Is there any suggestions there?
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. If
Mr.
our
Hardy,
witnesses
are you
have,
talking about?
excuse me, if our witnesses have any suggestions, you're out of time. Perhaps they could provide the answer in writing. Thank you.
I'm going to let Mr. Charlebois answer because it's too important. We want to have this information quickly if Mr. Charlebois wants to carry on with this question. Thank you very much, Ms. Desbiens. In fact, Mr. Hardy's question is quite complex because we have to divide it into two different worlds, the retail world and the service world. So the fraud problem, I think, is quite different in those two spheres of activity. In terms of retailers, I think to answer Mr. Hardy's question, it's really the distributors who are controlling the rules and the integrity of those labels that we are offering to consumers. In my opinion, it's them. They are the ones who have that control, if you want an answer. But in terms of food service, it's the Far West. Look, there are all kinds of things going on. Oceana spoke to you about this, and I imagine you heard about it from others. I worked with Oceana personally, and pardon the expression, but it's the Far West. It's really difficult to monitor. You're talking about compensating people for best practices. What would be a way of doing that, in your opinion? It's a good question. I think it's a good question, but I don't know if I have the answer, honestly. It's clear that we have to recognize that the financial burden of a lot of companies is something. And perhaps we should try and sell the virtues of these certifications more. If we go to a grocery store, I've been to a grocery store, and I won't give a name, but I went to the seafood counter, and there were certifications that were mentioned, like Ocean Wines, MSC, and I asked the attendant what that is, and that person had no idea. He didn't know what it meant. So there's a lack of education, obviously, and I was the first person to ask that question in the 4 years that seafood counter existed. So we can see that those programs and certifications aren't sold to the public. That could help, in my opinion. That because we can talk about education and awareness, but we should tell consumers, look for such and such a certification. Okay. Oh, no more time? Okay.
Us up. Time goes fast when you're having fun. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to unmute. I could see that Mr. Zimmerman had some follow-up thoughts that he was hoping to make there, but maybe I'll give somewhat of an open-ended question and you can add on if you'd like around the last question. But I was hoping, Mr. Zimmerman, that you might be able to expand a little bit. We spoke to Skipper Otto, for example, who had some really novel ideas around some novel approaches to tracking products. And I'm wondering if, just wanted to throw it out there to you, if you had anything that you wanted to share with the committee that you feel would be some solutions to traceability that would be important for us to hear about. Thank you.
What I have to say about blockchain and all this QR code, these are tough times. A lot of the, yes, some of the larger suppliers can, make those financial commitments to that technology, but by and large, it's not going to happen overnight. So, there's a wide variety of RFID tags, and we actually had here in the United States a challenge to come up with a low-tech traceability solution. So there's a wide variety of Internet of Things and tags and traceability codes and techniques to go about tracing product through the chain of custody. So I don't think that those will be hard to find. I was saying no about an issue that you guys brought up in terms of the government supporting third-party certification. That's very dangerous game to get involved in. And I'll say that because I've seen facilities that have been audited under a third party get written up by the government for not having critical systems in place like HACCP programs. So for them to be certified where those food safety programs are a critical component of certification, to then get written up by the government for not even having that program is a major conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Thank you for clarifying. That's good information for us to have as a committee.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. You have about 2 seconds, so you're not going to have time to ask a question or to get an answer.
I can
try. Everyone can try. We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Yeah, thank you again, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for appearing today. My first question's to Mr. Zimmerman. Up in Canada, I know the Fraser Valley well, and the one thing that I brought up before at committee is the IUU fishing that happens, and it's often black market fishing. The fish get traded for cash and cocaine, and I'm just curious to know if you have similar examples in Florida, or where you are, where you have seen the IUU fishery directly involved with organized crime.
I think I heard something not long ago about the eel fishery in Maine being involved in some illegal practices. Anything with high value, sea urchin, caviar, the value lobster. It's not a stretch of the imagination that's used as a currency here in the United States.
Saying that, and I'm not too familiar with your traceability standards other than what you've just explained. My hope, and I guess I would just ask for your feedback on this, what would the impacts be on applying traceability to those same groups of food to somehow stem that organized crime being involved in those in caviar and lobster, as you said? Do you think it would have an impact of a decrease in that the marketing in the black market?
At the end of the day, it's a matter of the competency of the people that are conducting those traceability audits of those systems, and there's a very limited number of boots on the ground that actually can conduct that type of reconciliation. And so, they have to, push their resources in one direction, and most of the time, that's to a ready-to-eat product that's going to impact the safety of our population. It's those products that are higher risk, like the leafy greens and stuff that's getting written up for salmonella and E. coli, any pathogenic bacteria. And so the concern isn't, the monetary value, but rather the value of our the safety of our population.
Okay, thank you. I'll go on to Ms. Boivin. You had some comments just about traceability, and I have some familiarity with this with agriculture and watched how effective it can be. And we dealt with the term organic, and it's a term that gets slapped on with stickers, it seems like, on everything. But now that there's a standard, there had to be an agreed upon standard what actually organic means, and there's different level of organic. But I'm asking you, I guess, about, you talk about that you don't want to have any added regulation or any added practices that add to cost, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess I would ask, if you think the standards are adequate, who actually comes and challenges you to prove that those standards are being met? Who comes in and looks over your shoulder to make sure what you're saying is accurate?
Well, from the beginning of January at Grizzly, we've had 4 certification audits, and that includes GFSI, which is an SQF code that is required by most of our retailers.
The acronyms, maybe you can explain what those mean if you can, the best of your ability anyway. Yeah, thank you.
SQF,
GSFI, those are international standards, which includes BSC, etc. So, and I don't know the transcription of that by heart. I could send it to you in writing after if you wish. But all of that is to say that these are certifications that we've had, 3 since the beginning of the year, are very expensive because each time we have to pay the person who comes.
Ones that come and do the audit, are they from Europe? They come over and do the checking, or is it something that's oriented in Quebec? Can you just say where they come from?
Well, for example, the person who's doing these certification audits for the GSFI is a person who comes from Quebec, indeed. They're third-party independent auditors who are hired by a company that's called NSF, and I can't tell you what that acronym means either, but they provide the auditors, and they're independent, to these organizations with their regulations, and they review point by point. So SQF had 300 points to check. So to come back to another earlier point, the organization that's responsible for auditing the retail sector and what labels say is CFIA. So they will have an inspection section that deals with our labeling and packaging in particular.
Mr. Zimmer, it's gone way over. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to the colleagues and to the witnesses here. Thank you for your testimony.
And quite frankly, thank you to all the witnesses that have come here to date. It's been quite a learning experience to look at the strengths and weaknesses and gaps that we have in front of us. And I also want to thank Madam DeBen for putting this motion forward, this study forward, and Bobby Morrissey, MP Morrissey, in the previous Parliament. I know he looked at this as well. It's exceptionally important to Canadians. So my question is to Mr. Charlebois. And as I mentioned, many witnesses have provided testimony about the need to act and address seafood issues in Canada. And you talked about it a bit here, and some witnesses have as well. But I'm wondering if we can do a deeper dive on what other countries are doing with regards to this issue. I believe we can learn a lot from what other countries are doing in respect to traceability. And I guess I'll start with Mr. Charlebois on this particular question. Do you know of any other countries that have implemented a successful boat-to-plate traceability program, and what systems and programs and mechanisms these countries have put in place to fight the seafood fraud? Can we start there? Maybe do a little deeper dive on those countries and what they're doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what can we learn in clear terms?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Mr. Callaway. I would say, I mean, we've had discussions with the Center for Food Integrity in the United Kingdom quite a bit, in fact. And the one thing that I've learned through the years that they actually take food fraud seriously. So far, the CFIA has received a budget of $25 million over 5 years to look into food fraud. And I would say I've been working with the CFIA for over 15 years. And early on, they never considered food fraud as being an important priority for the federal agency. Now it seems to be, but with $25 million, you can't really do much. What is going on with the UK and in Europe in particular is that we actually are seeing some movement around working with industry, awareness with consumers, generally speaking. But I would say the boat to plate traceability system really boils down to, again, what kind of certification program you're actually using in order to secure and reassure the public. And what I'm seeing the EU is that there's a lot of education that comes from these agencies to the public, and the public pressure is actually real. During the pandemic, we've seen 5 reports out of the EU looking at food fraud. In Canada, I've yet to see one.
Interesting indeed. So when I used to teach at the University of Calgary in the Con Ed program there, I would ask on any given topic or any given challenge, and this kind of builds on just what you're saying here. But you know, if we were to look at 3 things that we need to do today, Mr. Charlebois, like as a government today, what would they be? And it could be what you just mentioned, and it's a chance for you to expand on it. I do like the idea of education. It speaks to a very integrated approach to getting the information out. But in terms of systems, communication, education, what are 3 things that if we were to leave this room today that we could talk to our colleagues, talk to the government about to ensure that we push things in the right direction? What would they be?
So 3 things.
Or 4 or 5. I don't want to stop you at 3, but 3 is great. But if you have 4, go for 4.
1, we need to know exactly the scope of the problem. We do not know in Canada. So how big is the problem here? 2, design and create a safe place for industry and consumers to go to actually declare cases, suspicious cases. That's the second thing I would do. And the third thing is to actually encourage compliance, reward compliance as much as possible, and increase policing. I'm afraid I hate to say this, but really some companies out there are really damaging the reputation of the industry. I would look at those 4 things.
I have 19 seconds. Okay. With that, I will say, and this may have been brought up in previous testimony, but how long did it take the EU, Mr. Charlebois, to put the system in place that they have now? Like, how long was the development of that plan, and how long has it been in existence?
Well, since 2013, because of the horse meat scandal they went through, it really raised a lot of eyebrows, and policy just changed almost overnight. And research actually was funded, well funded on food fraud, and new technologies came about. And that's why Europe is a bit ahead of the game here. I'm not suggesting it can needs a crisis, but I think we need to move before we do have a major crisis in our hands.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. I know we've completed 2 rounds of questioning. Now we have motions that want to get introduced, and we have drafting instructions to do for the analyst. And in order to get into that part of it, we need to recess for probably up to 10 minutes for the switch over to the in-camera portion of it. So do we want to continue on, or do we? Well, either way, it's still going to take time for discussion and everything else, but it has to go in camera, yes. And the drafting instructions, yes.
Drafting instructions in camera, but not motions. But I agree if we want to end it now, that's fine.
Yeah, so.
Sorry, I should have pushed my microphone.
So, Mr. Hardy.
Yes, Mr. Chair. If we're able to consider my motion to add a meeting to this study, this would then relieve us.
We don't know if we can consider it yet or not, Mr.
Well, no, but
Hardy.
what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is that this would relieve us of the need to do drafting instructions today if we're going to hear more.
The motions first, but what I'm saying
course,
is, should
yeah.
we end the questioning here to have time just in case? I'll ask for permission of the committee. Okay. All right. So basically, this portion of our meeting is going to end off here. I want to thank our witnesses today and all the witnesses that have appeared on it. It's been a real education to something that I think most people don't pay much, as we say in Newfoundland, we don't pay much heed to it. And I'm not trying to be, in cutting it off here, I'm not trying to be, as my mother would say, contrary. And I know Mr. Small would know what I'm talking about, but I don't know if anybody else would understand it. But again, thank you to everyone for your valued information today. Okay. Yeah, we'll just suspend for a couple of minutes for our witnesses to leave. Thanks, everyone. you.